Emerald team, please welcome to the stage President of Performance Renew, Natasha Bowman. Natasha is a LinkedIn top voice for mental health, a top 30 global guru in management, and a top 200 voice in leadership. She also founded the Bowman Foundation for Workplace Equity and Mental Wellness with the mission of cultivating cultures of mental wellness and psychological safety in the workplace. Here she is, Natasha Bowman.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. How's your morning going? I need some energy in this room. I heard a lot of good news on the previous speaker. We got a great year ahead of you, and I'm glad to be a part of this. Thank you so much for having me here in Reno, Nevada. Never been here before. I've been all around the world, and this is the one place, I think, that I've never been. And it was quite a journey to get here, so I learned a lesson already. I came from New York, and I know you're probably thinking, New York City, like you don't sound like you're from there. I'm from LA, Lower Alabama. Do I still get a woo? So, my flight was delayed. I missed my connection in San Francisco. There was no more flights out. So what does a good speaker do? They rent a car and they drive from San Francisco to Reno, Nevada. All right. So it's been a journey. That's okay. This is my last speaking engagement of the year, and I'm sure that you're going to help me to close out this year with a bang, right? So thank you so much. So I'm going to start my presentation before I talk about allyship and its importance with a very personal story that you'll understand why I'm sharing this with you as we go through the presentation. But I want to warn you that this presentation talks about mental health and discussions of suicide. So if that's triggering for you, I want to give you the number to the hotline that can help you, which is a very simple 3-digit number, 988. Well, here's my story. This is me at 11 years old. Just kidding, just a cute little girl on the internet. Maybe that looked like me 30 some odd years ago, I don't know, but there's not a lot of pictures of me as a child because growing up, when I was born, I was diagnosed with a congenital heart disease. And for the next 11 years of my life, I battled a lot of hospitalized cases of pneumonia. And at the age of 11, I was told I had 6 months to live. Obviously, I survived. I had open heart surgery, and I thought that was the worst that life would have to offer me. Wouldn't you think so? But, as I got older, I did experience some challenges like we all do. I ended up going to law school, and when I went to law school, I was a single mom. In fact, my first day of law school was my son's first day of kindergarten as a single mom, and we were 10 hours away from anyone that we knew. But that's okay, I still ranked at the top of my class. Married now, I had my daughter my first day of my last semester of law school. I have perfect timing, right, in everything that I do, it seems like. But I still graduated on time. Now, as the years went by, I still faced challenges, but that's okay. I was always ready to face those challenges head on, to jump over any hurdle that was in my way to achieve my professional goals. In fact, in February of 2020, that says 2022, but actually 2020 in February 2020, I had achieved almost all of my professional accomplishments. I had started my firm, Performance Renew. I had big-time clients like Google and Hearst magazines and things like that. I had done my TED Talk, and I was named that top 30 global guru in management and was headed to Indonesia to receive that award. I thought nothing could stop me now. Let's talk about that timing thing again. February 2020, we all know what stopped me, right? In fact, a pandemic that I thought was worlds away on the other side of the world made it to the U.S. And you probably know because all of my events were canceled. All of my speaking engagements, my clients placed our contracts on pause, and I, for the first time probably in my entire life, I had nothing to do. While the rest of the world was busy making TikToks or jamming to DJ D-Nice on Club Quarantine and just having a good time, I was not pleased by that. My brain had not been trained to abstain from doing anything. And it went to places that it had never gone before. You see, my whole life had been centered around my professional success. And without that, I didn't quite know who I was. I didn't know what to be. I didn't even know how to be a wife or a mother. In fact, one day I woke up and I turned to my husband of almost 20 years and just said, I want a divorce. I want to move out. He was shocked. He was devastated. We were best friends, always had been. My brain was raging out of control. And it was because of this lack of this professional accomplishments. Then in May of 2020, after the murder of a man named George Floyd, many workplaces wanted to talk about race and racism in the workplace. We were experiencing a racial reckoning. And organizations and my clients start to reach out to me again to talk about race and racism in the workplace. And I had more clients than I ever had before. And you would think at that point that my brain would go back to what would be normal and typical for me, but it didn't. In fact, it went into a downward spiral. So down that in February of 2021, I decided I no longer wanted to be on this earth. And I took measures to close my eyes for what I thought would be the very last time. When I woke up, the next thing I remembered was someone taking the laces out of my pajama pants and taking the laces out of my shoestrings. And as I looked through blurry vision, all I saw was strangers. And I was walked to a room, a very small room, and placed on a mattress on a floor where a stranger looked at me constantly for the next couple of days. I had been admitted into an inpatient psychiatric facility. And it was there that I learned that I'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now, that explained a lot for me. It explained my ability to work for days at a time without sleep and sometimes hold 2 and 3 jobs at the same time. It also explained those days when I just couldn't get out of bed. Burnout is what I would call it, but I would later come to find out that it was a bipolar depression. You can imagine after receiving that diagnosis how I felt being diagnosed with a mental illness at over 40 years old. I was in a place of blame and shame. I thought that no one would ever see me as a credible, capable, or competent person anymore. I thought my business was definitely done after that. How would my family see me? How would my friends see me? I was going deeper and deeper into this depression once again until my mental health provider and my husband said, do research. Think of the positive of this. Research people who have been diagnosed. And I realized that through my research, the first images that came up perpetuated what I had done. I was in this self-stigmatization that many people go through. Those images are, dangerous things, people that engage in destruction due to their mental illness. But the more that I dug, I found a different story. I found that there are tens of thousands of people who are living with mental illness, and guess what? They are living successful and thriving lives. There have been people who have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder from Mark Twain to Mariah Carey. And I thought, well, if they can do it and have such a positive impact in this world, have a positive impact in my life, well, guess what? So can I. And it was in that moment I turned my pain into purpose. I decided that I would no longer hide behind the mask of my mental health condition, that I would break my silence and speak up on behalf of those that were just like me, that were suffering in silence. The mental health crisis was not just my problem. This was a problem plaguing America. In fact, during the global pandemic, 1 in 4 people have been diagnosed with a mental health condition. 1 in 4. That's 1/4 of the world's population. So one morning I woke up, I posted my professional profile picture on LinkedIn, and I captioned it, "This is the face of bipolar disorder." Now, as you can imagine, I was very scared to do that. I didn't know if the trolls were gonna come out. I didn't know what the outcome would be. But to my surprise, tens of thousands of people responded to that post, thanking me for my courage and my bravery for bringing to the forefront mental health conditions. And as I thought about that, I thought about, again, this is not my problem. This is our problem. Someone has to change the conversation about mental health and other things that we live with, things that disenfranchise us, things that don't put us on equal playing grounds in our communities and in our workplaces. I knew in that moment that silence is no longer an option. After the murder of George Floyd, as I talked about earlier, many of you realized that silence was no longer an option as it came to racism in America. And many of you became allies to many of your marginalized coworkers and neighbors, right? To talk about the things that had unleveled the playing ground. Now, if we think about allyship and the definition of that, right? Allyship is a strategic mechanism by individuals to become collaborators, accomplices, co-conspirators who fight injustice and promote equity in the workplace and through supportive personal relationships and public acts of sponsorship. And when we looked at some of the survey around allyship, an organization called leanin.org did some survey. Let's see if allyship is working. And this is what they found out. They found out that 80% of white men and women see themselves as allies to people of color at work. 80%. That is a resounding and positive number. But they thought about it. Have we seen a lot of change, though? A lot of tangible change with all of these allies. So when they looked at the respondents, right, from Black women and Latinas in the workplace, and whether or not the perception of allyship was there, we saw a disparity. So remember, it was 80% of white men and women that saw themselves as allies at work. But when they surveyed Black and Latina women, that number went down. So now we have a conflict between intent and perception, right? Also, when it comes to whether or not you have spoken out against discrimination at work, that level field was pretty, level. We saw about 41% of white men, 38% of white women, 41% of Black women, and 35% said, yes, I've spoken up against discrimination at work, which is good. But here's the thing. The next question was, what were you retaliated against for doing so? And that's where we see a huge disparity. Only 10% of white men and white women reported that they received retaliation for speaking up against discrimination at work, while 36% of Black women and 23% of Latinas reported that, right? So when we go back to that number of if you've spoken up against discrimination at work, we see that although the numbers are good, it was still less than half of white women and white men that have spoken up. And if we think about the basic tenets of allyship, challenging racism is one of those things. So while everyone has these great intentions of being allies, what we've discovered through this data, what we've discovered through not seeing the tangible effects of it, is that most allyship is performative. Performative allyship is based on the idea of self-gratification and does not look at the responsibility within the community. In fact, it can be disingenuous. So if we look at this difference between performative allyship, it can show up on an organizational level and it can show up on an individual level. So from an organizational standpoint, it's when you hire or say you're going to hire executives that are people of color or from other marginalized groups, but you don't quite do so. Or better yet, prioritizing the concerns of your marginalized stakeholders, but not looking within your own organization. From an individual perspective, this is how performative allyship shows up. It's about asking the oppressed to educate you about the well-researched and well-documented issues that are already out there, that are already established. It's about letting your privilege go unchecked. It's about looking for individuals to speak for entire races. It's about shying away from difficult conversations and other systemic inequities. Or simply by not saying, you're not a racist. So when I think about that, right, there's an example out there that really showed how performative allyship shows up. So meet Joseph Hill. Joseph Hill was hired at a health system in Houston to be their new Chief Diversity and Equity Officer. And he was 4 days out from moving his entire family from Atlanta to Houston to take that position. He quit his job, sold his house, and in fact, he was working with a realtor that the health system brought on to find a new home. But while he was looking for a new home with that realtor was making racially biased remarks to him. So he decided to report that back to his new employer. He was, in fact, right, coming on to be the new Chief Diversity Officer. But after he reported those racially insensitive remarks, guess what? His new employer rescinded his job offer 4 days before his start date. Of course, he's confused. What happened? I've quit my job. I've moved my family from Houston to Atlanta. So when he dug deeper into why his job offer was rescinded, they said, because you're too sensitive to race issues. Mind you, he was hired as the new Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. The very thing that he was being hired to do, he was fired for doing. His new employer did not want him to bring equity and inclusion and diversity into his new workplace. They just wanted someone with a title. That is a great example, or not a great example, but that is an example of performative allyship. So when it comes to allyship, I'm not here to critique it. We need it. But even when it's done well, even when allies truly seek to lift their marginalized coworkers, allyship presupposes the lines that divide us. It casts intolerance, right, and discrimination and harassment as their problem, and the ally as an empathetic outside supporter rather than a sympathetic co-laborer. So I came to the conclusion we need something more than allies. So I last year coined a new concept called ourship and proclaimed that we need to make the transition from allyship to ourship. Ourship is about giving away power and privilege instead of holding on to it, trusting that together we can affect more change than we ever could apart. Now, when I talk about ourship, I know I've talked a lot around it centering around race and racism. But when it comes to ourship, it centers around any marginalized group of people in the workplace, those in the LGBTQIA community, people with disabilities, people of color, women, age, the list goes on and on that we're going to center this around. When I think about ourship and how this can show up, today, you're going to hear from your DEI committees and other speakers about the strategic initiatives that are going to be put in place. Maybe there's new policies. Maybe there's new positions. But let's think about what you can do as an individual, because you don't have to wait for policies or laws or committees or strategies to employ ourship. Now, I'm a fan of TikTok. Any of you? It's really bad. Like really, I have to delete the whole app sometimes when I want to get something accomplished. The things that you can learn to clean with certain things, I mean, it's just too much. And I won't even start on my whole dance routines that I've learned. My daughter would be outraged. But I'm on TikTok, and I see this employee who very innocently was like, oh, after 37 years of perfect attendance at Burger King, I got a gift in the mail by them. He opens his gift, and guess what's in there? A pen. A movie card. Write a letter, go to a movie, congratulations, 37 years. Where his followers decided, Burger King, you dropped the ball on this one. 37 years of perfect attendance, and he gets a pen and a movie card. So they started a GoFundMe campaign for him, and they raised over $300,000. Now, he didn't ask for that. In fact, he didn't even complain about his pen and his movie card. He was happy to be acknowledged. But the people around him realized that although it was acknowledged that he had this 37-year perfect attendance record, that wasn't enough. He deserved to be seen. He deserved to be recognized and appreciated. And if this employer wouldn't do it, guess what? We will do it. That's how ourship can show up, right? Allyship relies on strategy and tactics, right, as I just talked about. It's about being performative, that we've seen many examples about. It's about, not making distinctions between us and them and we and they. And it depends on sometimes corrupt systems. Ourship undergirds strategies and tactics with heart, with attitude, and these shifts that make for real sustainable change. It requires us to advocate to put money where the mouth is. It erases that division of them and they and replaces it with we and us. And it makes sacrifices to reach down on others' levels to offer them a boost up. And last but not least, it disrupts the status quo by giving away power and privilege to those who have been held down. Now, one of my favorite people in the world is Serena Williams. Do I have any fellow people that? Thank you. She just so happens to be married to a billionaire. His name is Alex Ohanian, but I call him Serena's husband because I love Serena. But he realized the power and the privilege that he held within the tech community. And when he looked at the board of many tech companies, he realized that there was no black representation. So did he see that as, well, that's their problem? I hope that one day another tech company appoints someone. Should a position become open, they may appoint a person of color. No, that's not the way that he thought. He gave away his power and privilege by giving up his own board seat of Reddit, the company that he founded, and gave it away so that a black person could be placed in that seat. As we know, sitting on a board of a tech company gives you the immense power and privilege to change a conversation, to invite uncomfortable conversations in, to give a voice to the voiceless. That's how ourship shows up. So I know you're thinking, I am not billionaire Alex Ohanian, and I don't want to quite go through TikTok and just go through GoFundMe pages for random people at Burger King. So what can I do? So we're going to go through a few of these things of how ourship can show up in action. Perhaps you are a sponsor. meaning that you hold immense power and privilege and credibility within your organization. And you sit in boardrooms and meeting rooms where decisions are being made. That is your opportunity to say the names of people whose names would not be typically be heard. That would make you a sponsor. Perhaps you are a champion. You can be a champion right here in this room. And as people are speaking, you're amplifying their message and their voice throughout your social media platforms or other media networks. Perhaps you are an advocate. And you realize that people have been excluded from exclusive circles, and you invite them into those circles. But more importantly, you hold those that are non-marginalized in those circles accountable and ask them to invite others into those exclusive circles as well. Perhaps you are the upstander. Upstanders do not sit in silence and watch inequities in our workplaces, in our communities. When they see something, they do something, they say something. They fight for the right for equality and equity in our workplaces. Those are just a few examples how you can use your ordinary actions to influence extraordinary changes in our workplaces and in our communities. You know, when I share my story of being a mental health advocate, right, I am creating a safe space for people like me who've been diagnosed with a mental illness to do the same. I'm creating a safe space to show how extraordinary you are. My diagnosis is not just my problem, but it is a problem plaguing workplaces throughout the globe. And we need a voice, and I want to be the first one to be that voice. You know, it can be extremely difficult and challenging for me to share my mental health journey and diagnosis on almost a daily basis, but I think if I can save just one person, if I can just let one person know that it's okay, then I don't worry about my fear. My biggest fear is not what's going to happen to me when I use my voice for the greater good. My biggest fear is what's going to happen to the greater good if I don't use my voice. So I want you to think about this as I close. We all have immense power and privilege, and you may not be sure just how to elevate those around you who've been underestimated and held down, and that's okay. What I challenge you to do is to think about this. Allyship may be the first step, but it's only when we fight for inclusion and belonging our fight will win the battle, and we have to do it together. So as I leave the stage today, I want to ask you, who's joining this battle with me? Who's joining this war? Where are my warriors? Thank you. Who's going to wear a cape to your next event? Because you're going to be the hero for someone. Thank you so much for having me today. Enjoy the rest of your event, and hopefully I won't have to drive all the way back to New York on my way home. Thank you.